Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Liam's First Look. If you're new here, my name's Liam, and I pick fights on this channel each and every week. Last week was a great week for picking fights, but unfortunately for me, not the greatest week for picking bets. So I'm back. I'm back with a vengeance. I've been doing a lot of early research on this card, trying to get myself right. It was the first event of the year, and I felt good about my reads, but unfortunately, when you're betting on submission props and only one submission happens on the whole night, it's not going to be a good night for you. So I'm looking at this card. I'm excited about the action that we have coming at us from Canada, and I'm excited about the matchup that we have on top of the card. So let's do the housekeeping first off the rip. It's UFC 297. It's going down in Canada. And we have to take note of this main event, Sean Strickland versus Dricus Du Plessis. Fantastic middleweight clash. But I just want to let you guys know this is my first look. It's off the rip. I have a lot of tape study left to do. So if you want just my final analysis, no problem. I understand that will be later on in the week. On Thursday, I do a Bets and Banter show. I bring on a sharp guest and I try and break down all my action. But at the beginning of the week, I want to give you guys some early thoughts, some early looks, and I want to just try and put you in a position to succeed. So what I'll do is I'll talk about some trends, and I'll also talk about my first impression of each of these matchups, of the betting odds that we're dealing with as well, because a lot of these lines have been metastasizing for a while. They've been sitting out there, and some people, with that sloppy offering from the UFC last week, they've been looking ahead to these fights that are coming up on the pay-per-view portions at UFC 297 as well as UFC 298. We're seeing odds moving on both of those cards already. So without further ado, let's get into the first look. And how we always do on first look, we're going to start with this main event of the evening. Fantastic fight. You've got a blood feud here between two guys that both have, at times been unheralded, right? If you had said 18 months ago that there was going to be a title fight in the UFC between Sean Strickland and Dricus Du Plessis, not sure how many people would have bought that. But I've been keeping my eye on Dricus Du Plessis for a long time. I thought he was a real prospect in the division. He was the one that panned out. I kind of had my eye on Imavov. I had my eye on Andre Muniz. And, Imavov kind of stalled a little bit. He's had some wins. He's had some losses. Definitely went on a meaningful win streak. But kind of the fights that have mattered over the years, he's found a way to fall short in some of those opportunities. On the other side, Dricus Du Plessis, he's come up aces time and time again, producing a 6-0 record so far in the UFC. And there's definitely been moments of worry, right? I said after the Darren Till fight, I saw fade-worthy tendencies from him. But matchmaking is everything in this sport, in this organization. I think we saw that a little bit last week. I think we certainly saw that in this, career, right? You look at Dricus Du Plessis, he comes in against Marcus Perez, who, ended up being a pillow fighter professionally. We wish him all the best, but didn't really pan out in the UFC long-term. Trevin Giles, a guy that's had an up and down record. He's certainly been a tough out for a lot of fighters, but he's also a guy that's bounced back and forth between 185 and 170. Maybe not a traditional middleweight in that sense of the word, and he did struggle in the middleweight division, keeping that 15-minute pace and going shot for shot with a lot of these guys. So when I'm looking at that, I look at the fact that then Dricus goes against Brad Taveras. That fight told me a lot because I had Dricus Du Plessis on the money line, and then I had the fight to not go the distance. And I ended up losing money on the fight because I was bigger on the fight not to go the distance than I was on Dricus Du Plessis. The narrative was the cardio. Is this guy really going to be able to push hard for 15 minutes? And we've seen him gas out in the past. But what I also think is that we've noticed Dricus Du Plessis finds a way to push through that cardio barrier. Yes, he does appear to be tired in a lot of his fights, but he just finds a way to keep pushing as his opponents find ways to break under pressure. Now, Sean Strickland, difficult guy to break, right? But we'll continue talking about Dricus Du Plessis first, and then we'll get to the next part of the conversation, which is Sean Strickland, the champion. But first, we're discussing the challenger here. And that Darren Till fight is the last time that I had the balls to fade Dricus Du Plessis. I faded him there, and I felt really foolish, right? I said after the fact, Darren Till had high school level takedown defense. But when you look at how Darren Till performed there, he wasn't able to stop the takedowns. But he also was dealt a lot of huge damaging shots in the early going. He tried to no-sell him, but he had been dealt a lot of damage, and I think it was difficult for him to recover from that over the course of that fight. So when I look at that, I say, man, Dricus Du Plessis, could be the real deal. The Derek Brunson fight, I hated that spot for my guy, Derek Brunson. We had the same college wrestling coach. I always loved to root for Derek Brunson, except with his parlay, betting online. But when you talk about Derek Brunson at the time, he was a little bit past prime. He was a guy that was maybe not putting in the work by his own admission at that point in terms of the road work and some of the things he would have needed to do in that fight. So yeah, just a tough spot there against Dricus, who's a dangerous guy, who's dangerous in all positions. And then when you look at that Robert Whitaker fight, that was one of my favorite bets of the year last year, plus 300, Dricus Du Plessis. I just think that plus 300 in the middleweight division with a guy like this, who's got those kind of finishing instincts, who's this dangerous, I thought that was completely unreasonable. However, we're not dealing with a plus 300 in this spot, right? Let's pull up the odds board here and see what the best available price is. But I would assume it's about plus 115. Yeah, plus 114 on DraftKings right now appears to be the best market price. Let's pull up another source and see if it's similar odds on multiple books. But I would assume it's probably around that everywhere. I'm seeing plus 114 best available anywhere in the great state of New York, where I'm reporting to you live. Plus 120 on Tipico in New Jersey. So yeah, there is a couple stale 120s out there, 125s maybe, but you're really not seeing much better than that. And on the Sean Strickland side, he's been quite a productive favorite in the UFC. Both of these guys have been profitable in their odds range. I can tell you guys that off the rip. Obviously, Dricus Du Plessis, he has not lost in the UFC yet, but he has lost in the past as an underdog. He's 1-1 against Roberto Soldic outside the UFC, and he was an underdog in both of those fights. So I thought that was an interesting note coming into this. He's been an underdog and won in title fights before. He's been an underdog and lost in title fights before, granted outside of the organization. When you look at Dricus Du Plessis, he's mostly closed a favorite inside of the UFC. However, there has been an instance or two where he opened a plus 115 underdog. The line flipped. That happened against Brad Taveras. That happened as well against Trevin Giles, I believe. So early on in his UFC career, odds makers maybe didn't know how to price him. The public, the sharp betting community was coming in on the DDP side early in those markets, and that's what we saw. So when we look at this fight, let's pull up what the opening odds were on this fight. Dricus Du Plessis opens plus 130 according to best fight odds, and now he's down to plus 105, plus 110, plus 115 market average. So I think that this is a spot where some early money, some sharp money in all likelihood did come in on the challenger here, Dricus Du Plessis. However, you got Sean Strickland, who's got way more UFC experience at this point, right? 6-0 for Dricus Du Plessis, 15-5 for Sean Strickland. Very admirable record in his own right. And he's on a 3-fight win streak, wins over Israel Adesanya, Abus Magomedov, and the aforementioned Nasruddin Imavov. So when you look at Sean Strickland, put together a pretty decent run, and you could argue that he's on a 4-fight win streak. That Jerry Cannonier fight I thought was very close. Thought it could have went either way. I had no problem with the Jerry Cannonier decision on the night as a Sean Strickland bettor, but I also felt like I could have gotten that one as well. It was one of those fights that you kind of chalk up to being 50-50. And I think Sean was slight chalk that night, so it was probably the wrong side to be on, in fairness. But when you look at Sean Strickland, he does a lot of things that are difficult to deal with, right? He stays in people's faces. He throws a lot of volume. He pressures hard the whole fight. But we've also seen Sean as a human being, right? He could be chin checked. It's happened to him multiple times. Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos, spinning head kick. Alex Pereira put him down with that left hook very early in the fight. So I think that this is a spot where, Sean Strickland is, in danger of fighting very emotionally, right? He's talked about the fact that he kind of had an emotional blow up when this fight was announced. He kind of had that emotional blow up when they had the face off, when they did this, that, and the other, sending him death threats. If you talk about my family or my childhood again, like, I'm going to stab you with a knife. Like, those don't sound like things that are particularly, well thought out, cogent plans, right? It's more like he's losing control. And we always talk about an emotional fighter is not necessarily well equipped to deal with the rigors of 5 rounds, the dangerous, awkward positions they could be put in, and they could take on risks that they don't need to take. They could be a little bit more violent and aggressive and put themselves on the line in ways that could put them, in a position of vulnerability. And I do think that's something we have to be wary of here. Sean Strickland is not above having close fights, right? We look at the Jack Hermanson fight. I thought it was an insane split decision. I thought it was a clear Sean Strickland fight. However, he fights a little close. He leaves fights up in the air. And I think the biggest difference in that Jared Cannonier fight is Jared Cannonier was landing with more impactful shots. So I did think that that's how he was able to steal that. I thought Sean outlanded him, kept it very close on the volume, maybe even did the better work. But judges remember big, impactful shots. And I do think Dricus Du Plessis, very capable of landing big, impactful shots. We've also seen he's capable of getting takedowns, sometimes non-conventional takedowns, like that head and arm choke, throwdown, basically, that he hit on Robert Whittaker. There wasn't all that much technical about it, but the guy is a gorilla in terms of his strength. He looks like he's on every supplement known to mankind. So I do think that DDP is not somebody to be slept on or trifled with in any way. However, I understand why some people like the Sean Strickland side. They're saying to themselves, man, this guy's got 20 UFC fights. More often than not, 75% of the time, he's coming up aces. I'm getting a pretty cheap price against the new shiny toy, right? A lot of people like Dricus Du Plessis. They like what he's bringing to the table. They like the way that this guy is able to, finish fights. And Sean Strickland's a little bit more of a decisionator, right? He's got sometimes, depending on your perspective, an off-putting personality. And some of those things could create betting value, right? Sean Strickland is in danger of closing at a pick'em price with his opponent here, and he is the reigning champion. He did defeat Israel Adesanya, which I would argue is the best win between these two guys. However, what was the win like for Dricus Du Plessis over a former champion and Robert Whittaker? He absolutely put him away. He made it look easy. He dominated the fight, in my humble opinion. And I think that Dricus Du Plessis deserves a lot of credit and respect for that as well. One of the harder fights in the division. I didn't think it was, necessarily like a great spot for Dricus. I just thought that the price was crazy. Whereas, this is a spot where I certainly think both guys have a path to victory. But I think people are fooling themselves if they don't believe that Dricus Du Plessis has an ability to get this fight potentially to the ground. I'm not sure who's testing Sean Strickland in the wrestling and the grappling. I think that when you look at the historical record, there hasn't been that many guys, and guys like Kamaru Usman that have tried to do that have had some success. However, when you're looking at, the overall record, a lot of the guys he's fought are strikers. Uriah Hall, Christoph Jotko, Brendan Allen, that was a really impressive one. But if you guys remember that fight, Brendan Allen didn't try to grapple almost at all. He basically was content to go out there and strike, and it was a catchweight fight. Sean Strickland, above 185 pounds, is money for whatever reason. I don't know if the cut is serious for him, but when you look at who he's training with, I do think Sean Strickland is taking this challenge seriously. I think he's trying to put himself in the right space here, training with Johnny Eblen in the corner, at Extreme Couture, and working with Eric Nixick and the guys. Like, these are a very well-oiled machine. Eric Nixick is not to be trifled with as a coach, as a game planner, but he also has said in the past, Sean doesn't always stick to the game plan. He doesn't always listen to what I'm saying, and I have to try and always rein him in. And I'm sure he's going to have to try and do that in this spot as well. Against Israel Adesanya, there were some barbs, there were some jabs, but I'm not sure it reached the same level of personal animosity that we're seeing in this feud between Dricus and Sean Strickland. So for me, there's a lot of intrigue on this matchup. I think that this is a fight that's poised to end potentially inside the distance. Sean Strickland tends to be a decisionator, but when you look at the last fight against Izzy, Izzy really fought on autopilot and kind of gave away the fight, in my humble opinion, to just survive the fight, live to see another day, and come back and get it another time. And I think that when you look at Sean Strickland, he's kind of content to go out there sometimes and just keep fighting for 5 rounds. But I feel like if he has an opportunity to put away somebody like Dricus, I think he will try to take it. I think he'll try to unload on him with ground and pound shots, or put him in a choke of his own, or do something to get this guy to quit, break him, find a way to embarrass him. Whereas on the Dricus Du Plessis side, I don't know that he's as emotional about this fight as Sean. I think he's trying to be a lot more tactical. I do think that he's trying to get in Sean's head a little bit, make him more emotional. And I think that Dricus is going to come out here and try and kill him like he tries to kill everybody. When you look at Dricus's strengths as an athlete, he's extremely strong, he's fast and dynamic, and he can mix it up in different phases of the fight. And those are things that can trouble Sean at times. When he went against Alex Pereira, he got beat, with a clean left hook. If we saw that fight play out for longer, hey, maybe it's a different story. But we didn't get to see that fight play out for longer. He had the split decision with Jared Cannonier. He had the split decision with, what's his name, Jack Hermanson. And prior to that, he lost a dominant decision to Kamaru Usman way earlier in his career, lost to Santiago Ponzinibbio pretty dang clearly on the scorecards as well. And like I mentioned, Easy Dos Santos hit him with the spinning head kick. So Sean Strickland has just been human throughout his career. He's had injuries. He's had a bunch of other things to deal with. But I think coming into the fight, Sean Strickland has some things going for him, which is that he's a star. He's kind of developed this persona, this personality that gets him play, that gets him on podcasts, that gets him, more exposure. He's got millions of followers, all this, that, and the third. But I also think Dricus Du Plessis, younger guy, a little bit more marketable potentially. So it's a fascinating fight. Let's pull up the intangibles here via Tapology. Dricus is going to be 30 years of age here, 32 and a hook here for Sean Strickland, approaching 33 years of age. They are going to have the same height and reach, according to Tapology. Fascinating stuff where you have basically, identical anthropomorphic factors here. So I think that all trends towards a little bit of a closer betting line. The ABCs, as John Anik would say always bet on cardio, right? And I do think that based on what we know, Sean Strickland has some of the best cardio in the middleweight division. But I also wonder, what does that cardio look like if he's forced to grapple hard, for a long time? Because if I'm not mistaken, Abus Magomedov took him down in the early going, and then he kind of just ran out of gas, right? I wonder what would happen if Sean Strickland was routinely taken down in the early going. He always says jiu-jitsu is, not something worth doing, and this, that, and the third. But when you look at Sean Strickland's career, he did start out as a jiu-jitsu guy. So he definitely knows what he's doing on the ground. He's not a bum on the mat, but I don't know that he takes it as seriously as he should. And maybe he's done it this camp, but I think Dricus Du Plessis probably been a little bit more consistent with his training on the mats and his competitions on the mats as well. So I think that there's a couple different paths to victory here for both guys. I think when you're looking at Sean Strickland, more often than not, he's going to win this fight by knockout or decision. And I think that when you look at Dricus Du Plessis, more often than not, he's going to have to finish this guy. But I don't think he's drawing dead to a decision. I think that fights are weird. I have never seen Dricus go the full 25 minutes, but I'll look through the tape, see if there's an example of that. But I know that Dricus Du Plessis could potentially get some top time here, could stall out the fight. And we've seen him push through to a different, level in some of these fights when he's challenged. And I just wonder if this guy can really push himself to another level in a title fight. So far he hasn't given us a ton of reasons to doubt him. And when he's faced adversity in the octagon, even serious adversity, when he looked like he was completely death gassed, he was able to find a way back into the fight. So this isn't an easy fight to call for me by any means, but at least at my early first look, I would think that it would probably be a dog or pass situation for me. I'd need plus money to get involved with a fight like this. Because I don't think that Sean Strickland is always going to go out there and fight the optimal game plan. I faded Sean Strickland with Alex Pereira at plus money, right? And everybody said, hey, he's going to go take him down. He's going to do, all these things to outwork this kickboxer who doesn't have as much experience. And what happened? He ended up getting knocked out brutally there because sometimes the hands down and the baiting people in doesn't work. And Izzy didn't look like himself that night. He's getting a little bit older. He's getting up there in age. Maybe he didn't train as seriously. Maybe he thought, this is going to be an easy one against Strickland, and he didn't prepare as hard as he should have. But I think that DDP is going to leave no stone unturned and try and put everything into this camp to win the belt. So for me, feels like a dog or pass situation. But again, I can't blame people that are saying, hey, with a champion that's got this kind of cardio at this price, I just got to take it. Fair play. But for me, I like my guys that can go out there and get a finish, that are super dangerous fighters. And I think Dricus Du Plessis is those things. Plus, I remember they brought him in for that Adesanya face-off. They wanted to get this guy a title shot, wasn't able to make it happen. So I think that Dricus Du Plessis is somebody that the UFC has also had their eye on as a very talented guy on the way up. So shout out to everybody who's rocking with us in the chat. We got a ton of sharp people with us here as well. We've got some Canadians in the building, like our friend Kristen. So shout out to all our Canadians. Glad you guys are getting your UFC event. Shout out to our guy Feezy as well. Very sharp capper in the building. So appreciate everybody that's making the time to be here tonight. And I will not waste any more time on this main event. We'll push along to the next fight here, guys, where we've got the co-main event of the evening. Raquel Rocky Pennington taking on Mayra Bueno Silva, MBS. And Mayra Bueno Silva, they did her wrong, right? They ended up giving her a no contest for that Holly Holm fight because she took some Adderall, because she took some Ritalin, whatever it was. She had a little ADHD medication. So she was focused on getting that choke, all right? Just give her a break as far as I'm concerned. But when I'm looking at this, I say to myself, man, Mayra Bueno Silva, young, dangerous, really talented in all positions. She's going to be 32 years of age coming into this contest compared to 35 years of age for Raquel Pennington. So not a massive gap here, but 3 years can be substantial. And when you look at the Raquel Pennington side, she's 15-8 overall as a professional. So definitely a lower winning percentage as a pro compared to somebody like Mayra Bueno Silva. And you look, the Ketlen Vieira split decision. I mean, that could have really went either way, but she went out there and gutted out that win. Aspen Ladd no longer with the organization, been on a little bit of hard times recently. Macy Chiasson, another girl that's kind of always flaked out in the big moments and the big opportunities. She was putting it on Raquel Pennington in the early going there, and then it all went sideways in round 2, right? We've seen that story play out before. Then she beat Penny Kianza. She beat Marion Renault, who's no longer fighting, right? Retired. She actually lost to Holly Holm via unanimous decision. That was her last loss back in 2020. It was a rematch of a fight that she also lost via decision back in 2015. So she had 2 cracks at Holly Holm, wasn't able to get it done. Meanwhile, Mayra Bueno Silva, 1 crack at Holly Holm, a little bit of Ritalin. She's able to snatch that ninja choke, almost popped the eyes out of Holly Holm's head. And when you look at Holly Holm prior to that, I had actually bet Ketlen Vieira by submission. I bet Mayra Bueno Silva on the money line, and I bet Mayra Bueno Silva by KO against Holly Holm at plus 1,500, and she was diddy bopping her on the feet. Holly Holm wanted nothing to do with it. She started to wrap her up in the clinch, try and grab a hold of her, and then what happened? She got ninja choked. Thanks for playing. So I think that when you look at Mayra Bueno Silva's game, she's very impressive to me with her power, as well as her submission acumen for this women's MMA game. I just talked about it a little bit in the main event, how I was looking at some of that violent tendencies from DuPlessis and the ability to finish fights. And I kind of see that same ability in Mayra Bueno Silva, whereas we see a lot more decisions from Raquel Pennington over the course of her professional career. Just 5 finish wins for Raquel Pennington. And Mayra Bueno Silva has had 8 career finishes in a fraction of the fights. So for me, I think of Mayra Bueno Silva as a much more dangerous fighter at this stage of her career. And I also think of her as somebody who's a little bit more marketable, frankly. So who's got more followers? Who's got a bigger social presence right now? There's no question it's Raquel Pennington, but she's also had bigger moments, bigger spots, bigger opportunities. And I think that for Mayra Bueno Silva, she's been waiting for an opportunity to break out. Thought that Holly Holm fight was a big step in the right direction, but I didn't think it took her all the way to where she needed to go. Holly Holm's a little bit of an older name in the division, an elder stateswoman, maybe didn't have the same run of wins coming into that fight. So she didn't really get that same rub that a lot of people have gotten from beating Holly Holm. So when you look at this, I say to myself, man, this is a girl in Mayra Bueno Silva who I think the UFC would love to get behind. She's got some ability to go out there and finish women. She's got an ability to go out there and stagger women, hurt them. And let's just look at the women that she's lost to in her UFC run. She lost to Marina Moroz back in 2020 in her second UFC appearance. So, Marina Moroz had a little bit more experience than her at the time, was able to get one over on her. Then she has the draw with Montana De La Rosa. That's a little bit of a concerning look, to be fair. But Montana De La Rosa, awkward style, goes out there to push the wrestling pace. Then she lost to Manon Fiorot. I mean, frankly, that's just a very acceptable loss. So when I'm thinking about a fight like this, I just say to myself, are her wins crazy good? No, the Yanan Wu, Stefan Yeager with some controversy, Lena Landsberg, but they tried to set her up with the Misha Tate fight. I think she would have absolutely won that fight. Then they set her up with the Holly Holm fight. She doesn't technically get the win on her resume, but she's got the win in our hearts and minds. So she's 5-2-1-1. in the UFC. Very weird record, but I think overall she's a good fighter, and I think she's a dangerous girl, and I think she could put Rocky in some dangerous situations. So if we look back historically, Raquel Pennington has been TKO'd once, and she has been submitted once in her career. Amanda Nunes was able to TKO her in the 5th round, and if you remember, she tried to tell her corner, I don't want to go out for this 5th round. They sent her out there anyway, and she got beat up in that one. Tough look in that spot, unfortunately. And then Kat Zingano back in 2012 was able to submit her. So she has not been submitted since 2012, but you look at the quality of grapplers that she's faced in the interim, and I'm not really sure who would be able to, press her in the grappling to the same degree. So I think this should be a fantastic fight, and I'm really looking forward to it. I do think Rocky Pennington is not drawing dead in this fight. She pushes a hard pace. She's a tough woman. She wants to be out there fighting. Married to Tisha Torres, 2 girls that have been with the UFC for a long time. Or I don't know if she's married. She's with Tisha Torres, whatever. You know the deal. But I think that overall, these are good fighters. These are solid fighters, both of them. But I prefer the Mayra Bueno Silva side. I know she's the favorite. I know she's chalked out here, but I think she's going to get the job done in this spot. I think she's the more dangerous fighter. So give me Mayra Bueno Silva to get the job done. Before we move off this fight, let's just quickly discuss the anthropomorphics here. We are going to have the 3-year youth advantage for Mayra Bueno Silva at 32 years of age, and we are going to have a 1-inch reach advantage as well as a 1-inch height advantage for the Raquel Pennington side. So she's going to be slightly bigger here according to Tapology. But I think that Mayra is a little bit more dangerous, like I mentioned. So I'm not sure that the size will play a huge factor here. I think both women going to be at virtual size parity. And I think Mayra is just a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more dangerous at this point in their career. So give me Mayra Bueno Silva by finish. Next up, folks, we've got Neil Magny taking on proper Mike Malott. And I think that Neil Magny has been, if not my most profitable, definitely in my top 5 most profitable fades of all time in the UFC. Now, you got to pick your spots, as with all things, right? Neil Magny's won a lot of fights in the UFC as well, but I've really done a good job picking when is a good time to fade Neil Magny. And I've always said, that I think Neil Magny at times can appear to be a fish on the mat. And what I mean by that is that there's some guys that are, maybe not very quality in their grappling. Maybe they can't go out there and submit many people, but they can certainly defend, a number of submissions, right? They could be stingy. They could be tough. They can regard. They can get back to position. So are they going to win? Maybe not, but are they going to at least stay in the fight? Yes. And I think that for Neil Magny, that's very difficult at times. Frankly, I think Ian Gary absolutely let him off the hook. I think if Ian Gary decided to take him down in the first round, he takes him down in the first round and probably could have dominated that fight on the mat. But instead, what he elected to do was pick away with low ankle shots from the outside for the duration of 15 minutes. And frankly, he almost finished Neil Magny about 50 times in that fight, just wasn't able to get him out of there. So you look at Neil Magny's career, and he's made a career of being stingy, grabbing a hold of people, making it awkward in the clinch. But I look at a guy like Mike Malott, and I just say to myself, man, when you're considering the danger factor, I think that the danger factor is heavily in the favor of the Canadian Mike Malott in this spot. Neil Magny's a guy that likes to go out there, poke and prod with the jab, work from the clinch a little bit, lean on you. And shout out to Just Win Baby, says Magny going to embarrass this kid. Well, there you have it, right? He's got a different take on this, right? He thinks Neil Magny's going to go out there and get the job done. And it's very well possible, right? You look at Mike Malott, he's a guy that did start his career at 145 pounds, did take many years off, right? Neil Magny went out there and got a lot of that UFC experience while Mike Malott was on the sidelines. However, you look at Mike Malott's game today, and I think that he is proficient on the ground. He's a guy that's gone out there and gotten that black belt, competed at a pretty high level on the grappling circuit as well, and went out there and paid his dues, I feel, in that regard, trying to improve that element of his game. When you look at on the feet, I think he's a really dangerous striker. He's a bit hittable, and I've noted that in the past. I do think he has some fade-worthy tendencies. I remember Mickey Gall did bust up his face with the jabs back in the day, but you look at that fight and how he delivered Mickey Gall with a knockout blow in that fight, and it does tell you that this guy's got a lot of power and he's not afraid to deal in the pocket and throw down. And I think that you look at the fights that he had with these kids like Solomon Renfro, Shimon Smotrisky, right? These guys that are young, on the come up, and he kind of gave them that coach lesson, right? Went out there and showed the young guys, hey, I know a couple old tricks. I can really, do some damage quick. I can make you pay if you make a mistake. And I think that Neil Magny, he relies oftentimes on giving people that vet lesson and showing them a little bit of that tour of the octagon type of a feeling. And I don't know how successful he's going to be with that against somebody like Mike, because Mike is number one fighting in Canada. And I think that he's going to bring a lot of intensity as a result. And I think when you look at Neil Magny, what causes him to wilt at times, it's guys that are thorough with their aggression. And one of my biggest bets ever was on Shavkat Rakhmonov. I had 8 units on Shavkat on the money line. And obviously, we're not comparing Shavkat and Mike Malott right now. But what we're talking about is the fact that when I was fading Neil Magny, it was one of my biggest bets of all time. 8 units on the money line. Like I said, I had multiple units on the submission prop in that spot at plus 420, plus 350. I kept adding even on the way down. And that was a great spot, right? When you look at Gilbert Burns against Neil Magny, the sub prop I think was like plus 220 or plus 260. And I said that was a great spot. And I do think that even in hindsight, that was a great spot, right? You have a shark versus a fish on the ground. And I think that when I'm looking at, a guy like this in Mike Malott, I think what he brings to the table is the fact that he might be the best fighter coming out of Canada right now. I don't know that to be true, but when you look at the Canadian ranks, especially on the men's MMA side, it's pretty dire, right? It's pretty dire straits. And I think that Mike Malott is somebody that the UFC really wants to get behind. And I think that he's got power in his hands as well as that submission equity that I discussed. So where this gets greasy is if this fight goes the distance, right? I mentioned this with Waldo and Arlovsky last week. I didn't think Arlovsky had much of a chance at all to finish the fight. But I said if it goes to the scorecards, it feels like it's going to get a little bit greasier. And that's kind of what it seems like to me here. If this was a fight that gets to the scorecards, I think it's going to end up being, pretty sketchy here. However, if this is a fight that ends inside the distance, I think more often than not, it's going to be Mike Malott in a big way. And I'll just leave it at that. But I overall believe that Mike Malott is a guy that eventually will be fade worthy in this UFC welterweight division. But I think when you're looking at how they structured this card, I think they want Canada to have a big celebratory moment on this main card. And I think they want it to be Mike Malott, which could be Canada's best hope, in their current iterations right now. So for me, I like Mike Malott to get the job done here and probably to do it inside of the distance. But he is going to be much smaller. So let's talk about the intangibles before we move to the next fight. We've got a 4-year youth advantage favoring Mike Malott. He's going to be 32 years of age here compared to 36 for Neil Magny. And Neil Magny has way more UFC experience, right? He's been in a lot more fights in this organization for good and for ill. So 21-10 is Magny inside of the UFC compared to just a 3-0 record inside the UFC for proper Mike Malott, representing Niagara top team compared to Elevation top team for Neil Magny. So Neil Magny on the road here, taking on Mike Malott. So this is a fun fight, a good welterweight matchup, and I think it's the right fight at the right time for Mike Malott. I think he's going to get the job done here. Next up, folks, we've got Chris Curtis, the action man, taking on Marc-Andre Barriault. And this is a fascinating fight, guys. When you look at this, I think it's clear why the UFC put this together, right? Two guys that primarily like to go out there, strike it out on the feet. Marc-Andre Barriault tends to do some of his best work in the clinch along the fence line, in his volume striking as well. Chris Curtis, on the other hand, tends to be a precise boxer. He likes to counter. He likes to look for his shots. But sometimes he's a little bit too low volume, a little bit too complacent at times, sometimes complaining to the referee, getting a little bit emotional in the octagon. And I think that's something he's going to look to shore up. We got to note right off the rip, he's an Extreme Couture guy. He's a Sean Strickland training partner, longtime supporter, corner person, all these kind of things. So Chris Curtis has taken a big role inside of the camp as well, I'm sure. And he probably got some great work in with the champion in the lead up to this fight. Now, when you look at the previous performances in the odds range, right? This is a document I make every week on Patreon. And I looked at the previous performance and odds range. Chris Curtis is actually undefeated as a favorite 2-0 for a 56.5% ROI. And I'm sharing 2 undefeated trends right now. So stay tuned, guys, because the first undefeated trend, I'll say it again, Chris Curtis as a favorite, 2-0, 56.5% ROI. Doesn't mean it's going to stay that way after this weekend, but I'm just letting you know what the trend is. Now, what is the other trend that is undefeated on this fight, guys? Marc-Andre Barriault is 0-4 as a UFC underdog. Never won as a UFC underdog, so you guys can do the math there yourself. That's a minus 100% ROI. As many dollars as you bet on Marc-Andre Barriault as a dog, you have gotten back 0 of those dollars so far. But that could all change this weekend, right? We got to discuss the fight, the matchup itself. Just wanted to lead with that because it was a really standout trend for me where you got one guy who's undefeated in their previous role in this odds range, one guy who's never won in their previous role in this odds range. That to me just seems like a standout trend, something I'm really going to pay attention to, especially when you got the hometown guy who's on the wrong end of that trend. I know a lot of people are looking at the all Canada parlay, the narrative parlay. If there was somebody to bust it, maybe it's the guy that's on an 0-4 trend in this odds range. Just something to consider. And want to shout out our guy, Just Win Baby, as well. It says studio setup looking slick. Appreciate that, my man. We're going to get the camera angle just right, or bring the shelves down just a little bit to get that Ali, centerpiece looking pristine. But I really appreciate it. Put a bunch of time and effort into that, to make the studio look a lot better. And it's only going to be up from here, guys. Still a work in progress, still more posters and things like that on the way. So I'm really excited about the studio upgrades, and they are not stopping anytime soon. So thank you all very much for the support. Now, with that being said, guys, back to this matchup. We're on the main card. We're in the middleweight division, and we're talking about Chris Curtis, who is 30-10 as a professional. Ton of professional fights under his belt, and just 2 finished losses across that lengthy career. So gotta say, Chris Curtis, very durable guy historically. I would say the more durable of these two parties. However, he was flashed by Kelvin Gastelum in a clash of heads. I believe he did have the no contest clash of heads with Nasruddin Imavov. So my man has just had a really rough go of it lately. Being the smaller guy, kind of getting into these boxing exchanges and getting, these head clashes that have really derailed him in his recent fights. He knocked out Joaquin Buckley and kind of derailed that hype, for a little bit, and took everybody by surprise there. Looked like he was down on the scorecards potentially, and then just all of a sudden uncorked one on him, ended the show quickly. So we know that he's got the power to end fights, right? Brendan Allen, a guy who's on the rise in this division, who's got a win streak going, who looks like $1 million his last couple of fights. Man, Chris Curtis went out there and absolutely starched him on short notice. So I think that was a really impressive win. We look at the Phil Hawes fight. He was able to go out there and get an impressive win in that spot as well. Obviously hasn't aged as well, but you could argue that Chris Curtis maybe damaged the chin of Phil Hawes permanently as well, with the damage he was able to do there, going to the body, going back upstairs. He really ripped him apart with his boxing. Adolfo Vieira attempted like 20 takedowns against Chris Curtis. He's a strong guy. He's physical. He's elite at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He wasn't able to sniff a takedown in that fight. Chris Curtis, his takedown defense held up like $1 million there. He looked really good in that spot. So I think in this fight, Marc-Andre Barriault, how is he going to win this fight? Let's look at Marc-Andre Barriault's run through the UFC and compare it. He's 16-6 overall as a professional, 5-5 in the UFC. So he's a 500 fighter. He's got 1 no contest. He's tested positive for a banned substance before, if my memory serves. And when you're looking at him, he's got a loss to Andrew Sanchez that doesn't age great. I believe he's been cut from the organization. A loss to Christoph Jacko by split decision, doesn't age that great, been cut from the organization. A loss via unanimous decision to Jin Young Park. That one we can obviously forgive. Jin Young Park, very solid middleweight fighter. When you look at the Oscar Peixoto fight, no contest in that spot. I believe that's the fight that he tested positive for and got that one reversed to a no contest. Then he beats Abu Azaitar, who has not been very active at all in his professional career. He beats Dolce Lungiambula, who has about 4 minutes of gas and was never very good. He loses to Chidi Mjikawani via insta-kill knockout. He beats Jordan Beverly Hills Ninja Wright, who I believe has been cut from the UFC. So more power to him there. He loses to Fluffy Hernandez, which again, no skin off your nose there. That guy's about to fight Ikram Alaskarov. That guy's an absolute stud. And then he beats Julian Marquez, who I think is absolutely horrific. No disrespect to the man, but I just think, the injuries, the inability to string together a couple good rounds, a couple good minutes, a couple good situations or positions. I just really don't like his game. And then the win over Eric Anders, which is somewhat impressive, but also I thought that fight could have went either way. I thought Eric, gave an honest account of himself in that spot. So I look at this and I say, man, should be a good fight, but the intangibles here say to me, the guy who's more likely, in my humble opinion, to win this fight by knockout is Chris Curtis. But the guy who's more likely to maybe win a greasy split decision is the Canadian, who might be able to get that hometown rub. But I have to look at what the record of Marc-Andre Barriault has been in Canada. That is something I do not know and something I would like to check out. But he's a Canadian guy, born and raised, still trains there, I believe, at times. But he definitely does some of his cross-training in the U.S. as well. So these are two guys that are training in the U.S., fighting each other in Canada. But obviously, Marc-Andre Barriault, the homegrown Canadian talent. So I think they're certainly going to be rooting for their guy unless he gets starched in brutal fashion. So should be a fun fight. But my initial lean, I'm just going to let the trend be my friend and lean with Chris Curtis here, the more experienced fighter. But yeah, I am aware, Andrew, that he's been at Killcliff, but I think he does represent a Canadian team as well via his Instagram. But I actually couldn't locate that gym, so I'm not totally sure. I think he definitely trains at Killcliff more than anywhere else, so that's his primary facility. And I did note that as well in my research on Patreon, where there's some fighters that are like born, raised, and training in Canada, and other fighters that are born and raised in Canada, but maybe they're training elsewhere now. Maybe they live somewhere else, that kind of thing. So try to denote those differences as well. But great point. Thank you. All righty, guys, let's round out this main card with a good old swig of the coffee. Appreciate everybody who's rocking with us here. If you can, drop a like on the video, get subscribed to the channel if you're not already, because we got plenty more great fights to talk about on this stream, and then as well for that Bets and Banter stream later in the week. So you'll want to tune in and hear that. Cheers, everybody. Cheers. The coffee is delicious today. Now, we've got a fascinating fight. I mean, this is a great fight to be kicking off the main card, guys. We got Arnold Almighty Allen taking on Movsar Evloev, and this is a fascinating fight at 145 pounds, right? Arnold Allen, he was on the precipice of doing something really special. Only a handful of guys have rattled off 10 straight wins in the featherweight division. It is not something that is easy to do. And we saw Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski do that. And the only other guy who was right on the precipice of doing it was this guy, Arnold Allen. But he was denied by the man himself. Max Holloway was able to stop his momentum in its tracks. And now he's looking for a bounce back against one of the toughest fights in the division, right? Movsar Evloev, undefeated fighter. I talked about it, right? There's some undefeated trends on this card. All my homies that rock with me on Twitter, they didn't quite hit the number yet on Twitter for the goal, so I haven't shared all the trends. But for all the homies that rock with us on YouTube, I'm of course going to give those out for you guys. And what we've got is Evloev as a favorite, 7-0, 34% ROI. What does that tell you? It tells you two things. He's been pretty darn consistent in that role as a favorite, but he's also been significant chalk almost every time out, because that 34% ROI, it's not a huge ROI for a favorite, especially for all those iterations. It means that he's been big chalk. And when you look, he was huge chalk against the likes of Diego Lopes. I actually faded Movsar Evloev against Diego Lopes in that spot. And I think after the fact, most people won't blame me, right? You saw Lopes went out there. He pushed the action for the whole 15 minutes. He made him work. And when you're fighting a guy like Lopes on short notice, it's hard to prepare for all those crazy sequences he does with the triangle chokes, with the armbar series. And we saw Evloev now in many fights, right? The Nick Lenz fight, the Diego Lopes fight, he's been put in danger, but he's always found a way to work himself back out. He's always found a way to stay calm through adversity. So I think that's a real feather in the cap of Movsar Evloev. I think he is very good at what he does defensively. And I think offensively, he's a good round winner. He's a good control style grappler. A lot of the time, he could take people down, ride out top position, and normally negate a lot of the offense coming back at him. But you got to remember that Arnold Allen is a guy that keeps that pace into the third round, right? We've seen at times he was able to outlast Mads Burnell in a pretty grappling heavy fight, was able to get the submission late there. And what has become the meta in MMA, I talk about this on a week-to-week basis, but that ninja choke has become a lot more prevalent. And you saw Arnold Allen pull off a ninja choke, if my memory serves, in that fight against Mads Burnell. So when you look at Arnold Allen's game over time, he's become a lot more reliant on his power punching. He's become a lot more reliant on his ability to go out there and dictate with the hands. but we've seen at times in the past he can mix in his kicks, he can mix in the grappling as well. I don't think he's a fish out of water on the ground, but I do think that Movsar Evloev has proven to be a little bit better process oriented, a little bit better round winner, and a little bit more tactically dangerous. Over the course of this short 15-minute fight, I think Arnold Allen's going to have to find ways to sting, hurt, knock back Evloev, because when you look, there's been other guys that really challenged Arnold Allen. I remember right before the fight, I tweeted it out. I changed my opinion of the Sadiq Yusuff and Arnold Allen fight because I just had this gut feeling that Arnold Allen was going to be able to buzz the chin of Sadiq. But we haven't seen a lot of those same chin concerns, in my opinion, from Evloev. If anything, it's been more of those grappling situations where we've seen him in a lot more danger, especially in the recent fights. So I'm going to let the tape be my guide in this fight. I'm definitely going to do some more research on this fight, but I can't ignore the fact that Movsar Evloev has been undefeated in the trend as a favorite. As for Arnold Allen, though, he's actually been the more productive guy in terms of ROI as an underdog. So Arnold Allen, if you bet him every time out as a dog, he's 3-1 for a 79.8% ROI. So he's done very well as a UFC underdog. And you also look at the fact that Arnold Allen, let's look at how many UFC fights he's had, right? So Arnold Allen is currently 10-1 in the promotion. And we just said he's 3-1 as an underdog, right? So that means only 4 times out of 11 fights, he's been an underdog. Most of the time, they're favoring Arnold Allen to go out there and get the job done. Movsar Evloev, every time out, he's been favored to get the job done, right? So these are two guys that normally you're looking at paying a favorite price tag on these guys for sure. Pretty significant favorite price tag. So you could make an argument for taking either one of these guys, right? On the one hand, you could say, man, Arnold Allen, great fighter. Surprising to see him at an underdog tag. Gonna have to take this. But you could also look and say, man, Arnold Allen in the past, hasn't always performed as an underdog. Most recent time out, did drop the ball as an underdog against Max Holloway. Meanwhile, this guy Evloev, he's never let me down, right? 7 times up, 7 times out, and he's got it. So I think that Movsar Evloev at this cheaper price is also a potential play for a lot of people, a lot of sharp people as well. So we're going to kick it over to best fight odds right now and take a look at the screen, see what exactly the odds are looking like. So the odds seem to be moving on this fight, right? You were looking a couple days ago at a -175, -165, that kind of price on a Movsar Evloev. Now we're looking at a -210 or so on Movsar Evloev on Caesars, -200 on MGM, -192 on DraftKings. So number is moving towards Evloev right now, and I tend to agree with that number. I do think that Arnold Allen, good fighter, solid guy. I don't think this line should completely run away to -500 or something insane like that, but I do understand why, Movsar's taking the action here. And I think that Arnold Allen has the Canadian connection, right? But he is a guy that is from the UK and trains in Canada, but maybe not the native son in the same way. So I think that this is a spot where, we're going to see 2 elite featherweight talents. And I just think Movsar might have the better game for winning fights at a high level. So for me, give me Movsar in this one, but not with a great degree of confidence. I do think it's a very fun and competitive fight. And I need to do a little bit more tape study before I say with conviction that it's going to be Movsar, because I really like Arnold Allen. I thought he was going to go out there and compete with Max Holloway, keep it honest. And I think 48-47 on one of the judges' scorecards indicates he was able to do that, but he just did not have what it takes to push over that edge and get the win there. And Movsar Evloev, he wants to earn that spot. He wants to earn that opportunity. Now you go, from Arnold Allen being in a 5-round main event to being back opening the main card. It's kind of a step back for your career, and that could be something that takes away from your motivation potentially. So for me, I like Movsar Evloev with the momentum moving in the right direction. Give me Movsar to get the job done here via unanimous decision. All right, folks, next up, let's see it. Brad Katona taking on Garrett Armfield. And this fight will be the prelim headliner, and it will be contested in the bantamweight division, guys. So we've got a 135-pound bout here between the only 2-time Ultimate Fighter winner, Brad Katona, taking on Garrett Armfield. And Garrett is a guy that was signed to the UFC on short notice, to fight David Onama. David needed an opponent. Somebody pulled out on short notice against him. So they said, hey, we'll do a rematch. These guys had already fought, I believe, on the amateur scene. David Onama got the better of him there. He got the better of him once again in the octagon. We faded him. Me and JWB, I believe, put out the graphic that day, and we had Onama by sub. And he was able to go out there and deliver plus 500. So now we've got, a win for Garrett Armfield, right? He finally got back on track, went out there and delivered to Shomi Kazama from Consciousness in the first round. But now he's got Brad Katona, who I think is a little bit more difficult of a challenge, right? Brad, not the most prolific finisher you've ever seen, only 4 finish wins in his career in 13 professional wins. However, what we've seen from Brad Katona is that he is a guy that can go out there and push a pretty serious pace. He can mix up the wrestling and the grappling. He can go out there and throw some hands on the feet, but he can also take some damage, right? He lost to Merab Dvalishvili and Hunter Azure via decision. And one of those losses is not like the other. Hunter Azure ended up getting cut from the UFC, I believe, whereas Merab Dvalishvili is maybe 1 fight away from a title shot. So Brad Katona definitely did not have an easy run of it, but he was able to submit Bryce Mitchell back in 2018. So he does have some real wins on his resume. Also beat Kyler Phillips via controversial majority decision on The Ultimate Fighter in a shorter fight. Was able to beat Timur Valiev via controversial split decision as well. Brad Katona just finds a way to win these fights, and he is a Canadian, born in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, and he's now training out of SPG Ireland. But I do think that Brad Katona is maybe a little bit better than a Johnny Walker, right? Maybe a little bit more coachable as well. And I think that Brad Katona might be able to go out there and get this win. Now, he is a favorite in this spot, and we have seen that Brad Katona is 2-1 as a favorite for a pretty meager 3.3% ROI. And on the other side of things here, you've got Garrett Armfield, who is 0-1 as a UFC underdog, and he did have a minus 100% ROI as a result. So you look at the data here, not a huge data set to work with, but it does suggest that Brad Katona has been profitable as a favorite, albeit slightly. And I think that Brad Katona makes more sense to get the job done here. Personally, he's never been finished in his pro career, 2 losses, both via decision. And I just think that he's a pretty tough guy that typically finds a way to win. And I think he's probably got the better wins overall on his resume as well. So give me Brad Katona to go out there and get the job done via decision in all likelihood, but I'm not going to rule out his ability to go out there and submit somebody like Garrett Armfield, who's been submitted on a number of occasions in his career. All righty, folks, sip of the coffee and it's on to the next one. Cheers to the sharpest chat in the game. Appreciate each and every one of you guys rocking with us live. If you haven't already, make sure you drop that like on the video if you're enjoying the conversation. But with that being said, let's talk about Charles Air Jourdain, another Canadian brother, taking on Sean the Sniper Woodson. And I'm going to leave, one of the undefeated trends on the cutting room floor for this fight, just because it was so surprising and strong to me. But what I would say is Jourdain as a favorite is 5-2 in the UFC for a 17.3% ROI. So he's done a pretty decent job as a favorite so far in the organization. He is just 28 years of age here, so he's going to be the younger party. He's 6-5-1 in the organization overall. So we've seen that Charles Jourdain has been a little bit better than 500 as a UFC fighter. He's currently on a 2-fight win streak with wins over Kron Gracie and Ricardo Ramos. And I thought it was pretty impressive that he went out there and submitted Ramos so quickly. If he had went out there and knocked him out, something like that, that wouldn't really have surprised me. But to go out there and get the submission win in the first round against a guy who likes to go out there and trade jiu-jitsu positions with everybody, that was impressive to me. To shut down Kron Gracie didn't tell me too much because Kron looked like a shell of himself there. But we also saw that, he went out there and just did his job, right? He was a similar price favorite in that spot, I believe, and he went out there and delivered in a big way. So that was on a pay-per-view as well. If you look throughout his career, he's only been on pay-per-view for the UFC just that one time, and he did go out there and get the unanimous decision. So I thought that was a pretty good sign for him. He lost to Shane Burgos via majority decision. Guys, I got to tell you the truth. Shane Burgos is a Section 9 guy. He's a New York guy. No quit in New York. New York stand up. However, I think Shane Burgos had an argument for losing that fight to Charles Jourdain. It was a super, super close fight. Could have went either way. So Charles Jourdain, lost a majority decision there, lost a unanimous decision to Nathaniel Wood. And Nathaniel Wood, pretty good fighter, and just showed that the takedown defense is really not there for Charles Jourdain. But his submissions are there against lower level guys. And I do think that when you look at Sean Woodson, he does show one loss via submission, right? He got dark choked by Julian Erosa in a fight where he just completely gassed out because of the pace, because of the aggression. I do think that you could see somebody like Jourdain replicate that kind of style, that kind of pace. And Luis Saldana was also able to get the split draw there because Luis Saldana was not very intelligent about that fight, but he hurt him several times. He had him completely rocked and wobbled, and I do think he could have finished him there if he had fought a little bit smarter. So Luis Saldana accomplished that as a plus 290 underdog. However, when you look at the other side here, Woodson has typically been a favorite more often than not in the UFC. So he's not a guy that's super familiar with this underdog role, but he's going to be an underdog here against Charles Jourdain. And when you're looking at the intangibles, we talked about the age relationship, right? Charles going to be 28 compared to 31 for Sean Woodson, so 3 years of youth advantage. But we're also going to see a pretty sizable height and reach advantage for Sean Woodson here. He's going to be 6'2" compared to just 5'9" for Charles Jourdain, as well as a 78-inch reach compared to just a 69-inch reach for Charles Jourdain. So when you think about Jourdain and how he would win this fight, I think Jourdain would have to go out there, potentially mix up the wrestling and the grappling, try and get this guy to the ground. Because I do think Sean Woodson is vulnerable on the mat. I do think he can be exploited there. But we also saw Dennis Bazooka tried to mix it up a little bit there. And Dennis obviously has not proven himself to be UFC level at all through his current performances. But we did see that Woodson has gotten a little bit better with his grappling, with his wrestling. He was trying to look for his own takedowns as well, getting very, confident with it. So when you look at Sean Woodson, not a lot of people on Tapology are expecting him to win this fight. Everybody's picking Jourdain, but people are split on the methods here. They don't know how Jourdain's going to get it done. For me, Jourdain's best chance to win this fight is via submission. I also think he can go out there and get the decision. He's got the home field advantage. I believe he lives and trains in Canada. So a lot of things going for Jourdain here, but he does have a 2-5 career record to the decision. So he has not been performing very well in those fights that go the distance. His record in the UFC in fights that go the distance is 2-4. So he just has not produced in those longer fights, in those 15-minute fights. We've seen he struggled at times to put it all together for the full 15 minutes. Maybe he takes the second round off here, a third round off there, kind of comes and goes with his aggression. And oftentimes the third round is his best round, but I just feel that we haven't always seen consistency from Jourdain. So he does seem to be getting a little bit more mature, a little bit more precise, a little bit more aggressive, but can he string it together to get a third straight win in the UFC? He's never done it before. Can he get that 3-fight win streak? Let's find out on Saturday night. But tepidly, I'm going to pick him to do so in the early going. But I also think that if this line continues to move in his favor, right now we're looking at a price of Charles Jourdain about -175 best available, -190 on a couple of these books. I think if we get to the point where Charles Jourdain is like -250 or higher, I would probably have to look to fade it just on principle because we have seen Charles at times make really boneheaded mistakes, kind of give fights away a little bit and keep them very close. And especially the way he gives up takedowns at times. Both of these guys were finished by Julian Erosa via submission in round 3. That's hysterical. So I think that, there's a lot of parallels between these guys, but Dixon is not wrong. Shout out to Dixon in the chat. He says Woodson has a very chokeable neck. Liam, I agree with you. I've seen Woodson in a couple vulnerable positions. So far, he's done a pretty good job staying safe in his recent fights, but Terrence McKinney had him in all sorts of trouble. Then McKinney lost position. Woodson gets up, flying knee. The fight's over right then, right? The story of Terrence McKinney. But when you're looking at this spot, I do think that it's a fun, compelling matchup. Both guys have a chance to win, but Jourdain, more well-rounded game for me, and I think he does have some tools to get it done. But you got to just remember, there is a pretty big size disparity here. So next up, we've got Serhiy Sidey taking on Ramon Taveras, and this is a fun one. When you got Sidey and Taveras, This is a rematch from the Contender Series, guys. And Sidey is the Canadian. He did get the job done in the first matchup, and everybody is expecting he is going to get the job done once again in this fight. But I will just say one thing that was kind of interesting to me was Dana White looked perturbed by that stoppage on Contender Series. It's actually the whole reason I bet Taveras in his second Dana White Contender Series stint. I was like, man, why would Dana bring this guy back if he didn't want to sign him right now? Because, he looked horrified at the stoppage. He looked really mad. He was like, terrible stoppage, like bullshit or something under his breath. And so I had all those screenshots. I had all that stuff stored away in my notes and information. And it just reminded me, if they rebook this fight, obviously people are going to be on the Sidey side. It makes some sense. He's gone out there and TKO'd this guy before, but Dana White didn't agree with the stoppage, right? Probably going to give a little bit of a longer leash in this fight, given how the last one went. And Taveras is not a pushover, right? He's a pretty dangerous guy. He's been finished twice, I believe, in his professional career. 9-2 as a pro. Both his losses are by KO in the first round. Lost to Edward Massey via KO1, and lost to Serhiy via KO1. And then he went out there and got his own KO1 in his last fight. As for Serhiy, he does have one loss via decision to Matteo Bogle, one of the other top prospects in Canada around his weight. So I think you can give him a little bit of a pass for that, but he did get systematically out-grappled in that fight. He was submitted on the amateur scene as well. So Ramon Taveras, the problem is for him, he's not a prolific submission artist. He does have 3 wins via submission, all 3 via choke, rear naked chokes over Christopher Wingate 1-0 and Anthony Tisdale 3-13. But he did submit Marc-Andre, former UFC fighter, via guillotine choke in the first round. So seems like Taveras has some ability, on the ground, but most of his fights were in pretty low-level promotions. Combat Night, he's 8-1 in that promotion, and now in the UFC, he's going to be making his debut here, so could be dealing with some jitters. He's going to be making his debut. It's going to be on a pay-per-view card, so that's going to be tough for both guys potentially. And you also have to think that for Sidey, last time out, he went out there and got the first round knockout. That's going to give you some confidence, but it also may make you think like, how can I look better against this guy? It puts a little bit of pressure on you, especially to deliver in front of your home crowd on a pay-per-view, as opposed to in the Contender Series where it's a lot lower stakes in some ways, where it's only 50 people in the crowd, and the matchmakers. So I think that this is a fascinating rebooking, and I do think everybody's going to pile on the Sidey side. But when you're looking at the market on this fight, it's only minus 165 for Sidey. And I do think these are the kind of guys that might end up having to go 3 to figure out who's really the best in this one. Because Taveras is kind of a gunslinger himself, right? He's got a bunch of knockout wins himself. So he's a killer be killed style guy. He wants to go out there and find the knockout. 1-0 career to the decision, but 5-2 career to the knockout, 3-0 career to the submission. Taveras wants to kill or be killed. That's the way that I see it. So for me, should be a fun scrap here. And I expect somebody's probably going to get put down, but we don't always see these fights go the exact same way as a rematch, So we saw this fight once before. It ended really quick. Maybe both these guys are a little bit more tepid, right? Maybe they take this fight a little bit slower, trying not to get knocked out, clipped on the chin. That's only understandable. Self-preservation is human nature after all. So we are 1 hour into the show, and we still got 4 fights to break down. So we'll take a big cheers to that, and we'll wish both those guys the best of luck. But honestly, I don't have the strongest thoughts there. I just think that the line kind of suggests it's a dogger pass situation, because I would think that the Canadian that already has a win via KO1 would be over 2-1. And the fact that he's only minus 165 kind of tells me that, they think this is a super volatile fight. But I do agree with this. Scenarius in the chat, Snaarius, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but if it goes to decision, the crowd will carry. Yeah, I definitely agree. In Canada, would not be surprised to see the crowd go completely bananas for Serhiy, and maybe that pushes the judges over if the fight does go the distance. Next up, guys, we've got 2 ladies with a huge Instagram following. We've got Gillian Robertson, only a fraction of the amount of followers as Polyana Viana. Polyana Viana, one of the more popular Instagram accounts on the card. Is that because we're fighting? You tell me. I would think that it's probably for other reasons, but when you look at both of these women, it's Gillian Robertson. who has the better record in her odds range. Gillian Robertson as a favorite is 7-3 compared to just 2-3 for Polyana Viana as an underdog. And that's not a 2-3 that was profitable. It's an unprofitable 2-3. So the ROI for Polyana Viana minus 7.8% ROI as an underdog compared to 16.5% positive ROI for Gillian Robertson as a favorite. So when I'm looking at a matchup like this, I say to myself, man, you got two girls with some grappling chops, right? And I don't expect Polyana Viana's meme armbar to work on Gillian Robertson. But with that being said, Polyana Viana, I do believe, is the more dangerous striker of the pair. When you look at Gillian Robertson, she's never been a very comfortable or dangerous striker, and she tends to do a pretty decent job of hanging on. So let's refer to her record right now. She is 12-8 as a professional MMA fighter, 9-6 inside the UFC as a promotion, and she's 9-1 career to the submission, but just 1-1 career to the TKO. And she is actually 2-6 career to the decision. So a terrible decision record for a women's MMA fighter, especially a primary grappler at that. Really surprising. When you look at the Polyana Viana side, on the other hand, she's 5-0 career to the knockout. She's 8-2 career to the submission, but she has never in her career won a decision. So despite having just 2 wins via decision, she is the much more prolific winner via decision is Gillian Robertson. So fascinating fight here. And the other difference between these two women is 15 fights in the UFC for Gillian Robertson, and she is 9-6 in those fights. Positive record. 4-5 for Polyana Viana, negative record inside the organization. And frankly, I think that when you look at how the UFC has match made Polyana Viana recently, I think it speaks to the fact that they've been unhappy with her asking for the cosplay stuff, the hypersexual Instagram. I'm sure they're cool with all that to an extent, but I also think that, if there's other problems, if you're pulling out of fights, things like that, Polyana Viana did withdraw from a bout that was scheduled with Emily Ducati for 5/20, so May 20th this year, or last year, excuse me. And when you look at that, they then rebooked her with Yasmin Lucindo. And Yasmin Lucindo, guys, is a problem, right? I think she's one of the better prospects in the division, especially among the youth. She's very young, but she's got a lot of MMA experience. She's been putting in time on the mats. She also has a striking background. So Lucindo is a real problem. And Lucinda was able to go out there and beat her up. She knocked out Jinh Yu Frey in the first round, but Jinh Yu Frey is a much older fighter, really struggled in her UFC run. Tabitha Ricci was able to go out there and just take her down and stand over her, and she was so inactive in that fight. It was one of the easiest bets I've ever cashed. Tabitha Ricci minus 120, I think it was, and she just stood over her throwing kicks to the thigh, and it was an easy money decision victory. And I'm sure most people were booing because it was a terrible fight, but it was a great, easy win for Tabitha Ricci, and I was very happy with that bet. But otherwise, Polyana Viana beat Mallory Martin, Emily Whitmire, Maya Kunaheli in the UFC. I mean, who are these people in some regard? And Mallory Martin and Emily Whitmire, I know who they are, and they're not very good fighters. No disrespect, but just girls that were not able to keep their jobs in the UFC because they were not of the level, right? It was for health and safety reasons. So no disrespect there, but two girls that both had a really tough time, and you look at the losses she had. Veronica Hardy, before she was Veronica Hardy, was able to go out there and submit her via armbar in the first round. Hannah Cifers was able to beat her, and Hannah Cifers is pretty undersized girl without that much upside. JJ Aldrich was able to go out there and beat her, and JJ Aldrich is a girl that has fumbled the bag a couple times in big favorite positions. So all these things being said, I just think this is a spot where Gillian Robertson, the Canadian, who's trained at Goat Shed, who's trained under Dean Thomas, been one of his personal, projects over the years, who's been a UFC lifer basically, who's got more experience in the organization, and who actually has decision wins under her belt. I think Gillian Robertson is probably going to go out here and get the job done. When you look at what Dixon has to say about this fight, he says Polyana Viana feels like she has the type of IQ to engage Gillian in the grappling because of her Brazilian bravado. Brazilians can't be afraid to engage in BJJ. As you know, Polyana, here's a paycheck. Liam. Yeah, I tend to agree, man. I think that Polyana Viana can get wins over lower level girls. I do think her best chance to win this fight is by knockout. I think that Polyana Viana has some power in her hands. She's kind of got bigger hands for a woman, and she wants to go out there and throw. So I think that this is an interesting spot. I got to do the tape because the tape is normally what's most revelatory and how some of the grappling situations are going to play out. But the other thing is, One girl's been profitable in this odds range, the other girl hasn't. So for me, it feels like a Gillian Robertson or pass type of fight. But I understand why people, like that violent girl in Polyana, Viana, with the huge social following at plus money. Listen, I can't fault you there. But for me, it's a Gillian Robertson spot. And I think she might even get the job done inside the distance here. Next up, guys, we've got a welterweight matchup between Yohan, Lainesse, and Sam Patterson. And this is another fight where I'm going to have to keep one of these undefeated trends close to the vest. Want to make sure I retain some value for the Patreon folks, but we're still going to let you know that before the end of the week exactly what the undefeated trends are on this fight. And we do have an undefeated trend that I'm happy to share for the next fight as well. So what we have here is Yohan Lainesse has never been a favorite in the UFC. I found that fascinating, right? I just went back and looked, and he's been an underdog every time out. So, he's done better than people expected of him, right? He's 1-2 in the UFC. And he was an underdog on the Contender Series as well. I believe he was an underdog against Evan Cutts in CFFC. This guy's just been a dog. And he's been going out there and overperforming, right? Getting the knockout win against Evan Cutts, getting the knockout win against hype prospect Justin Burlinson on the Contender Series. But then Gabe Green went out there and dealt with some early adversity, then came back to smash Yohan Lainesse in round 2. Seemed like he gassed out, seemed like he did not have the gas to go. Then he goes out there against Darian Weeks, puts on a much more low volume performance, greases out a very close split decision type win on a pay-per-view card. Now we look at Mike Malott, the guy that we just talked about, right? Mike Malott went out there and absolutely got the choke, easy money, right? And really quickly finished a guy in Yohan Lainesse and made him look bad on the ground, frankly. Just made him look pretty amateurish there. So when I'm looking at a spot like this, this is an interesting one because Sam Patterson went out in his last fight and he got absolutely obliterated in short order by Yanal Ashmouz, the Red Fox. And I don't think that a lot of people had Yanal on the radar at that point. Then he was supposed to fight Nasrat Haqparast. Seemed like a fight that, he had some potential to win. Everybody was picking Haqparast. And then Sam Patterson ends up withdrawing from the bout, says, I can't make it at 155 pounds anymore. So now we're seeing Sam Patterson move up to 170 pounds. And he's going to be the much taller party in this fight. So you've got Yohan Lainesse at 6'1", taking on 6'3" Sam Patterson. So despite moving up in weight, he is actually going to be the taller and longer individual. He's going to have a 2-inch advantage in the reach, 78 compared to 76. My source here being Tapology, of course. And when you're looking at the age differential here, Sam Patterson's going to check every anthropomorphic advantage off in this fight. He's going to be 4 years younger, 27 years of age compared to 31 for Yohan Lainesse. So when I'm looking at this fight, the White Lion, the Canadian, the guy who still trains in Canada, I definitely think the UFC wanted to give him a winnable fight, but this isn't a easy fight. It is a winnable fight because he's got power in his hands, and we know Sam Patterson can be caught, he can be clipped, he can be knocked out. He was knocked out in 2017 in the first round in Brave. He was knocked out in the first round in 2023 by Yanal Ashmouz. So it can definitely happen. But we also know that Sam Patterson's put together a lot of wins. And by the way, he's done it before, in fights that people didn't expect him to win. A lot of people thought Kamil Magomedov in Brave FC was going to get one over on him. He was able to deal with some adversity there and able to get the win as well in that spot. So I do think that when you're looking at a guy like Sam Patterson here, he's going to be highly motivated, in my opinion. Could we see a better chin from not cutting weight? I do think there's a possibility of that as well. Could we see potentially better cardio, a better ability to push? I think all those things are possible. Sam has always been, hittable, right? Like if I could criticize him, I do think we've seen lots of instances in his regional footage, as well as, in that Yanal Ashmouz fight, as well as in some of his Brave FC fights. This is a guy that is, so tall that he has a little bit of that tall man defense. But again, at 170 with some time out of the octagon at just 27 years of age, we could definitely see some improvements here as well from Sam Patterson. So don't want to sell him down the river just yet. He was heavily favored to win his last fight, if you guys remember, and he ended up losing there, right? Big pressure at home on a pay-per-view. They're bringing him back for another pay-per-view card. They're flying him out to Canada this time, and maybe he's, getting the chopping block here. But if he's able to get a big win and a big finish over a guy like Yohan, who's never been a favorite before in the UFC, that would be, his ticket back to relevance, his ticket back to, big fights and people talking about him and saying good things. But when you look at how that last fight played out, I do think that fighting a guy like Yohan, who's got this big power, could be a problem, right? Yohan's going to try and swing for the fences, take his head off in the early going, and Sam's going to have to really be weary of that. He's going to have to look for takedowns. So I'll do my tape here. I'll make sure that I understand this matchup a little bit better in depth. But it does seem to me like Yohan Lainesse doesn't have enough data points to suggest he should be, a heavy favorite in this spot. So for me, it would be Patterson plus money or pass. But I also, just don't really feel great about Sam Patterson. So for me, I'm going to wait and see on this one. I'm going to have to take a disciplined approach and do my research before I get a strong lean. I think it's a volatile welterweight matchup, and I think it's very likely to end inside the distance. I'll tell you that. Next up, guys, we've got our first look at Jasmine Jasudavicius and Priscilla Cachoeira at 125 pounds. And I said I would give you guys an undefeated trend on this fight. So unclog your ears if they're clogged right now, because we got one for you. Jasmine Jasudavicius, 0-1 as a UFC favorite, right? She's been an underdog in most of her UFC outings, and she's overperformed those expectations, right? 9-3 overall as a professional, 3-2 inside the organization, but only one time was she favored to get the job done. So this is a girl in Jasmine Jasudavicius who has really gone out there and overperformed. She's done the damn thing. She's earned a lot of her victories. But now we're looking at Jasmine in a minus 380 price tag when she's not shown that she can go out there and deliver as a favorite many times. Has she shown she can deliver in Canada? Yes, she has. She did go out there against Miranda Maverick and deliver in a fight where Miranda kind of took that on a little bit of short notice. She probably got back in there a little too quick. And I think the UFC tried to set up her for success. And when you're looking at this fight, I do think the UFC is trying to set up Jasmine for success. Priscilla Cachoeira is 4-5 as an underdog for a 27.8% ROI. So she's been quite profitable if you've backed Priscilla Cachoeira as an underdog. But they also call her Priscilla Catch a Beating on the Dogger Pass show. Shout out to those guys, two very sharp individuals, two fun guys as well, Cody Safdie and Paul Shaughnessy. But when you look at, Priscilla Catch a Beating, it comes from that Shevchenko fight, right, where she got held down, she got her wrist rode, she got beat up every which way but loose, and she got beat to a bloody pulp, damage that is irreversible, right? So you look at the career of Priscilla Cachoeira, and she shows that she's got real power, right? 7-0 career to the knockout prop, but she did get beat to a bloody pulp, like I mentioned. She's been submitted 3 times as a professional, and she is 5-2 in her career to the decision. So when you look at her most recent fight, she lost via sub to Miranda Maverick. I expected that to happen. She was able to go out there and knock out Ariane Lipsky, who's been surging recently, in the first round, and also beat Ji Yan Kim in a very close fight where she was able to do some damage late in those fights, late in those rounds, in order to get the win, in order to sneak one out there. She did lose to Gillian Robertson via sub round 1, and she also cheated brutally in that fight. So shout out to Dixon, says we have to be on the point deduction at plus 2,000 here. Eye gouges, fence grabs, groin shots. I believe it all. And when we also look, she beat Gina Mazzani as an underdog. She beat Shannon Thompson. So she hasn't been beating the best quality of competition. That's certainly fair to say. But Priscilla Cachoeira overall has been a profitable entity. The same cannot be said of Jasmine. However, Jasmine has overperformed as a dog. So we're giving her another chance as a favorite here. I think Jasmine has a style that should get the job done. But I could never advocate laying this price on Jasmine, frankly, because she is a little too hittable. She does get her eyes swollen up at times. I think she's got the heart, the will, the skill, the grappling, the tenaciousness, the tenacity, a tenacious approach to her takedowns, right? She's got a lot of things going for her. But I think that when I'm looking at the downside for Jasmine, it's just that damage that she incurs at times on the feet. She can get swollen up a little bit. I think that this is not quite true. Jasmine, the face of Canadian MMA in the UFC, I definitely think she's one of them. But Mike Malott, I believe, is the face of Niagara Top Team, that gym. So something to keep in mind there. I think she would say the same thing if you asked her. But in any case, we could wrap up there on that very fun women's flyweight fight where Jasmine Jasudavicius, I believe the only ranked Canadian in the UFC, looks to keep her winning ways under her belt. She has dropped her most recent fight against Tracy Cortez. I expected her to lose that one, but that was a close fight. We do have to say, Miranda Maverick, that's a great win. Gabriela Fernandez, that was a fine win. Went out there and got the takedowns. Natalia Silva, that was the loss she had as a favorite, right? You could forgive that a little bit, right? Natalia Silva, now the talk of the town in the UFC, been minus 600 and whatever in most of her fights. I think that this is a good spot for Jasmine to go out there and get the win and potentially even a finish of her own, because she does tend to be a very aggressive girl in pursuing takedowns, finishes, top time. And I think she's going to try and do that here. So if you look at her career record, she's only got 2 wins by knockout and 1 win by submission. But a lot of times she is battering her opponents as well. She's doing a lot of damage. She's chasing them down in round 3, trying to put it on them if she can. All right. And last but not least, we've got the flyweights, guys. And this is a fight where my strongest lean is to the under. The flyweight unders, it's like a meme at this point. But I really think that this is a matchup that it makes some sense, right? We've got 2 guys that are both primary grapplers, black belts, but also guys that can be submitted, right? They can be caught, they can be out-grappled themselves. Jimmy Flick, no losses via submission. But I also think that can always happen to Jimmy if he gets rocked first, right? Because he does have 5 losses, or excuse me, 6 losses. I misread that. 6 losses via knockout on his record, no wins via knockout for Jimmy Flick. So I think the chances of him getting buzzed and submitted are always there. And I also think that when we're looking at, Malcolm Gordon, I've often said Malcolm Gordon is at times an underrated grappler. He's 6-2 career to the submission prop. And when you look at the submission losses on his record, he got armbarred by Muhammad Makayev in the 3rd round of what was a pretty competitive fight. And he basically got rocked by Amir Albazi and then triangle choked in the 1st round. But again, Amir Albazi is a guy who's right now in the top 10, top 5 in the division, no matter how you want to slice it. So Malcolm Gordon's a guy that's gone out there, got a decision win unanimously over Francisco Figueiredo, went out there and cashed me a nice plus 210 underdog ticket as a plus 210 underdog against Denise Bondar, who I did not think had proven anything to be a minus 250 favorite in the UFC. So losing to Jake Hadley, a guy that I believe Gordon actually missed weight for that fight, man. So I thought it was Jake Hadley that had missed weight. Malcolm Gordon missed weight for that fight. That's a huge problem. He is 32 years of age trying to cut to flyweight. That's difficult to do. But Jimmy Flick, same thing can be said, right? 33 years of age. So the Canadian Malcolm Gordon here is going to have a 2-inch reach advantage. They're going to be at virtual height parity here, 5'7". So I think that you look at these 2 guys, both of them are coming off 2 straight losses. I think the UFC put this together because, frankly, they both have a grappling style. Neither one of them has a very good chin. So I think that they wanted to see, hey, who can go out there and get a win? And they wanted to give Malcolm Gordon a winnable fight in Canada because he is a Canadian. He is a guy that's gone out there and put on some fights for them, but it's not an easy task, right? Malcolm Gordon typically wants to go out there and leverage that grappling over his opponents. And I'm not sure he can do that against Jimmy Flick, a guy who hasn't been submitted in a pretty lengthy professional career. But I do think that Malcolm Gordon might have the speed and the striking edge. So I think that Flick could get, just caught on the chin pretty early by Malcolm Gordon. Charles Johnson, not a prolific finisher, right? Was able to go out there and get a finish in the very first round against Jimmy Flick. Alessandro Costa was able to go out there and get the 2nd round finish via ground and pound. So I think that when you look at Nate Brown in the comments here, he's making a great point. Flick is so frail. We wish Flick the best, right? We don't root against him or anything, but it just has seemed like he lost some of that physicality when he did a premature retirement. He came back to the game, and I'm just not sure we've seen that same fire, that same tenacity, and I think maybe he's just trying to fight out his contract, get as much money as he can. And I don't blame him for that. I think that's a great idea. Get all the money he can. Malcolm Gordon, one of the more forgiving matchups in the division. Maybe you hit that flying triangle or something, but I just think of this as a spot where if Jimmy Flick is not hitting that flying triangle, if he's not hitting some crazy, move in the early going, I think what's probably going to happen is Malcolm's going to land some big shots on him and wear him down a little bit, maybe outlast him in the cardio as well. I think Malcolm Gordon's probably going to get the job done. Now, am I super comfortable with Malcolm Gordon at chalk prices? No, I can't say I'm eminently comfortable with that. Malcolm Gordon, 0-0 as a UFC favorite, right? Never been favored to win a UFC fight. And Jimmy Flick, on the other hand, is 1-2 as a UFC dog, minus 20% ROI. So Malcolm Gordon, you got no sample size, and Jimmy Flick, you got a negative sample size. So neither one of these guys inspiring a great deal of confidence. But what I can say about this matchup is that you've got, two guys that are both volatile, that are both killer be killed archetypes, that both want to fight in an aggressive fashion. So if you can get a good price on the under, on the fight not to go the distance, maybe you don't try to be Nostradamus, maybe you don't try and pick sides here, and maybe you just hope that somebody gets violently finished, because that's been the story of their careers. So for me, that's the first look, guys. That's what I've got for you. We've done an hour and 25 minutes. We've hit 12 fights. And what I can promise you is that we're going to have this timestamp for you as well. If you want to go back and say, hey, what was his thoughts on this fight or this fight? You can go back and check that out. If there was something I didn't cover on here that you're curious about, make sure you drop that in the comment section below. Hey, can you let us know this? Hey, what is your thoughts on that? Hey, what was that trend that you mentioned? Be happy to let you guys know a couple of those things as well. And I wanted to say that my guy Dixon has been asking for the all Canada parlay. Listen, my brother, I'm not a huge parlay guy, but I always got to try and answer the people. It is the good guys versus the books. So Dixon, I will try my very best to give you something here. I think that if I was to parlay up these Canadians, it doesn't bring me any great joy, right? Because my guy JWB, Just Win Baby, is saying that Mike Malott is the mush of the week. But I think that Mike Malott is going to get the job done inside the distance. I think that Marc-Andre Barriault is better left off the card, personally. I think that Brad Katona is going to get the job done over Garrett Armfield. I think that Charles Jourdain should get the job done over Sean Woodson, but even that, I don't like that. So maybe stick with Brad Katona. I would go with Gillian Robertson over Polyana Viana. It's women's MMA. There's always the meme armbar. There's always the KO from Viana. But truthfully, I just think that Gillian Robertson, has a lot of logical case for winning that fight. I think that those are the ones I'd be most comfortable with. If I had to do man, it's just not one that I feel comfortable parlaying up. But kind of my confidence, my order of confidence would go Mike Malott, Brad Katona, I guess Jasmine, Gillian, Malcolm, Charles, Serhiy, Yohan, MAB, because I think some of those guys at the bottom, I think they lose, right? So I think Jasmine wins, to be clear, right? You guys asked. I think Jasmine wins for sure. She's from Niagara, top team, all these things. But I like to have proof of concept. That's something I talk about long-term on this show. And there is not proof of concept for her winning as a favorite, at least in the recent sample size. So I'll look a little bit back. But last week, we did very good with our picks, but we got to find those better betting angles this week. Going to be a little bit sharper, a little bit more careful, a little bit more discerning, and try and find those winners. But we've already got a lot of resource documents up. I'm going to continue to be grinding away, working at that. We've got fight tape. We've got a side report, and we've also got the previous performance and odds range. I'm going to get started with some written previews, doing some Instagram stocks, all these kind of things, as well as my tape study in depth to make sure that we're prepared for this fight card, because we got a great pay-per-view offering. It's not like last week with a shitty fight night that half the fights are falling out and the fight I actually cared about gets canceled the day before. No, we've got a great fight, a great slate of fights, a title fight. We've got a lot on the horizon to be excited about. So I'm excited to be here. I'm glad that you guys all joined me. If you guys don't mind, on the way out, make sure you drop that like on the video. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and get subscribed. I would really appreciate it, because we're going to be back later on this week talking more fights and having more fun. So come back later and we're having all the same fun again. God bless you all. Good luck on the fights and take care until next time. Thanks, everybody.